Our topic today is key difference between Trump and Harris on the energy sector. With me today, the great friend Ronald Stein, senior policy advisor on energy literacy for the Heartland Institute, and co-author of the Pulitzer Prize nominated book Clean Energy Exploitations, and John Shanahan. He is a doctor of engineering from the Germany University, Bochum. Maybe this is the correct pronounce, I'm not sure. Uh, Good afternoon, both. It's a pleasure to have you both here, John and Ronald.
Glad to be aboard.
Good afternoon, Armando. Nice to be here.
Perfect, fantastic. Let me start with Ronald because he's always knows about politics, and so the U.S. elections are in 20 days, around 20 days. Is it clear for you, Ronald, Harris and Trump thinking about oil and gas, renewable energy? What do they think? What are the difference between these two guys?
Well, my biggest concern is that Harris believes energy is wind and solar, and that wind and solar can replace fossil fuels. But wind and solar only generates electricity. Whereas when you take a look at fossil fuels, you got coal, natural gas, and oil. Now, coal and natural gas is heavily used in power plants. Oil, on the other hand, is never used to generate electricity. In fact, oil, as we talked about before, is useless. It's black tar unless you can manufacture it into something usable. And with human ingenuity, going through a refinery, you get all these oil derivatives that now makes more than 6,000 products in our daily lives that didn't exist 200 years ago. In fact, wind and solar cannot exist without oil because they are made with those products, the wires, the insulation, the computers, on and on and on. But all the parts are made from oil. And again, wind and solar do different things than crude oil. That's the main difference that Harris has no comprehension of.
Great. John, and how do you see this difference between these two candidates in terms of energy?
The difference between the candidates, or I would like to prefer the platforms of the two major parties. The platforms of the two major parties are what America is about for the long term. The candidates this year are only for the present time, and the difference between the platforms of the two parties are that the Democratic Party is on record for at least 20 years as advocating for wind and solar, supposedly a green energy, and they are on record for keeping fossil fuels in the ground. That's that's their platform. It's well known, and it has a lot of implications. And I spend a lot of my time when I'm not busy with my website or busy with professional friends like Ronald Stein, talking to people who are thoroughly embrace wind and solar and think that it's a good solution. Whereas the other party, the Republican Party, has held for the entire last 50 years or so a balanced approach to sound energy policies, in my opinion, and that is to continue full bore with use of fossil fuels and to continue full bore with use of crude oil for fuels and for 6,000 incredible byproducts, including the byproducts that I'm wearing, my jacket, my headset, and the internet enabling us to talk with both of you. So that's it, real brief. The Republican Party has had a better energy policy than the Democrat Party. by supporting fossil fuels of all types and nuclear power, and the Democratic Party working behind the scenes to stop nuclear power for decades, and the Democratic Party working to promote the idea that carbon dioxide from fossil fuels causes catastrophic global warming, and therefore they want to keep it in the ground. So that's how I see it real brief.
Yeah, perfect. John is in Colorado. Ronald is in California, the country
Yes.
called California. And
Country
I'm
called California.
and I'm the south part of Brazil. John, but please, could we say that Trump sees, or Republicans sees, a climate skeptic? They do not believe on climate crisis.
Say again, please, Armando. Say again.
Yeah, sure. The climate crisis. Do you see that Republicans believe on that?
Oh, I'm involved with the CO2 Coalition in the United States, and with Klimanachrichten in Germany, and Clintel in the Netherlands, and all of those organizations and their scientists, hundreds of scientists, and my good friends in South Africa, physicists, all see absolutely no problem with carbon dioxide in general, and certainly not from the partial component of carbon dioxide from fossil fuels. They don't see any problem with it scientifically. And I work in depth on those topics. I'm actually right now working with a professor at Montreal, at McGill University in Montreal, Professor Gerald Rotzer, and an engineer in Florida, Terigi Saccone, and the three of us are running a 2-month global internet discussion about the science of carbon dioxide and recommendations for policymakers. So I think that the Republicans have a much more realistic idea of carbon dioxide and climate change.
Uh-huh.
And by the way, if I may, without taking too much time,
Sure.
I've traveled across Latin America, North America. I've lived in Europe for 11 years, and a Swiss friend has gotten me to travel to Nepal and Tibet, and I see firsthand what nature is doing now. And like my science friends, I'm a civil engineer, like my science friends, I see a beautiful world and no climate crisis on hand.
Uh-huh.
And the last thing I'd like to mention is a photograph I post on my website from the United Kingdom, where they are also going abandoning fossil fuels. They've closed their last coal power plant, and I show a photo, and it shows snow in England or Scotland that is about 14 feet deep, and a snowplow has carved out a road. But that is the winter conditions that happen in the last 20 years. Without exception, it happens frequently in the United Kingdom. And so I don't see carbon dioxide from fossil fuels as a problem at all. And it's the molecule of life, as we all know, with plants.
Ronald, are Democrats following a green agenda? Is it a bad choice?
Well, as John mentioned, we talked about CO2. Yeah, CO2 is fuel for growing food. You know, we now have 8 billion people on this planet, and fortunately, the CO2 is allowing us to, grow food around the world. Greenhouses artificially inflate the CO2 level so they can grow plants and food faster. And people don't they keep talking about CO2 is increasing. Well, CO2 is around 420 parts per million, but we're basically at a low point of CO2. If CO2 gets down to 170 parts per million, life cannot exist. So do they want to reduce CO2 and eliminate the 8 billion people? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Like I say, CO2 levels in the world are, at the lowest level they've been in, centuries. And, the Earth has gone through many, many changes through its 4 billion years, ice ages and the melting spells. And, today with the products we have, we can live through any cold weather. We can live through any hot weather. And weather-related fatalities have almost been eliminated because of the fossil fuel products. And CO2 levels at 420 parts per million is near the low point. So I'm not sure what they're complaining about.
Mhm, mhm. John, do you see that we need renewable energy or we do not need renewable energy?
We need energy, and climate change is a manufactured word, and renewable energy is another manufactured word, unfortunately. I would like to briefly point out something about this whole conversation, and particularly about my friend Ronald Stein.
Let me interject and have John answer it this way. Instead of talking about energy, let's talk about two subjects: electricity or products. Because electricity can come out of wind and solar, no products come out of wind and solar, versus oil where you get all the products. So you're talking apples and oranges. You want to talk electricity? Do we need electricity or do we need products?
Yeah,
Because
but electricity coming from solar and wind. That's the point.
Or from hydro,
Hydro,
fossil
biomass,
or
yeah.
nuclear.
Yeah.
Definitely, Ronald is got a very good point here that
Yeah.
we have to keep foremost in our vision the fact that there are two issues for the modern world: the byproducts of crude oil that are really byproducts, and the byproducts that are fuels. And both of those are not about making electricity, but the byproducts or fuels are for aircraft, ships, cars, trucks, and agricultural equipment. And they all come from crude oil. And electricity, it can be made by coal. It's a very plentiful. India is going full bore on it. China has gone full bore. And by the way, China is now using coal plants that are as modern and clean as German coal plants, which are the cleanest in the world. So, yeah, we definitely need to keep track of the fact that we're talking about byproducts of crude oil for actual products, everything from my pills that I take. Where is it? There we go. And to my jacket, to my kayak, to my whitewater canoe that has been sunk and destroyed several times, and to the airplanes that I fly. But I would like to just point out for our audience something particular about Ronald Stein. I think of him. Ron doesn't know this, but I think of him as a guide star for the modern world, the components that make the modern world, namely crude oil. I think of him as a guide star. Now, a guide star might be completely unfamiliar to most people, but I have the pleasure of knowing Professor William Happer, physicist at Princeton University, and he was sitting in the White House about in the 1980, early 1980s, and they were talking about problems the military has with seeing things in the sky, namely incoming problems. And the problem they had was that they had the equipment to eliminate the threat, but the navigation information to keep track of that threat was blurry. And how does it blurry? It's blurry like when we look up in the sky and see the stars. What do? They twinkle. And it's that twinkling that made it difficult to eliminate threats up in the sky for the military. And so Professor William Happer at Princeton in 1982 approximately said at a Washington meeting, "I think I can solve that." And what he said was, your equipment to eliminate the threat needs a steady star, like the North Star. And it needs it anywhere in the sky where the threat is coming from, so you can aim at the threat. And he said, I can fix that because I can use a laser to put a artificial sodium star right where the target is. And that laser will be steady. It won't twinkle. And so you can aim at the threat. And the military embraced the idea. And Professor Happer, my friend, a good friend of mine, was worried that the project wasn't going to work. But that became this project known as Star Wars. But now for our audience, the most interesting thing is that the observatories on Earth all over the planet, when they look at the stars, they see the stars twinkling too. So they can't see the stars as well as telescopes in space. So Professor Happer's guide star is now in every observatory of any significance around the world. And with that guide star, the observatories are able to continuously adjust their mirrors in their telescopes so that they can take care of the twinkling. And now, what does this long story about Star Wars have to do with Ronald Stein? Well, the modern world is totally dependent on fuels and physical byproducts from crude oil. And for me, Ronald Stein is the best person highlighting that importance and identifying all the products. So I'm very glad to be working with Ronald Stein. He is my guide star for the issue of energy and byproducts for the modern world.
Yeah, he is really
Thank you,
great.
John.
Ronald, how do you see solar and wind energy, electricity, in terms of energy security?
Well,
Can
let me-
help
let me-
energy security or the opposite?
No, let me answer that in a different way. Electricity came after oil. Let me repeat that. It came after oil. 200 years ago, we had no electricity. There were no wind turbines, solar panels, hydro plants, nuclear plants, natural gas plants, coal-fired power plants, because all the electrical generating systems are made with the products that are made from oil. The computers, the wires, the insulation, the air conditioning, the doors, the glass in the door, the upholstery, all the components. So if you get rid of oil, you get rid of electricity. We're back to the 1800s. And that's the point that, there's no silver bullet answers. There's different ways to make electricity. If you have coal and places like, China that has an abundance of coal. It's abundant, it's inexpensive. That's probably best for them. If you're in Arizona where there may not be a lot of coal, that may not be the best for you. So location really determines which kind of electricity you're going to have. If you're near a place that you can have a dam, you can have hydropower. You can't have hydropower, in the middle of Arizona because there's no water. So you really have to take a look at the location and adapt to that location about what kind of electricity generation you want. But again, it's only electricity. Remember, electricity can charge the iPhone, but electricity cannot make the iPhone. And if you get rid of fossil fuels, there'll be nothing that needs electricity because you'll have no TVs, you'll have no iPhones and no iPads and no defibrillators. There'll be nothing that needs electricity. So it's a small world, and I got to get politicians to stop using the word energy and talk about what they want to talk about. You want to talk about electricity generation, or do you want to talk about the supply chain of products that's needed by the 8 billion people on this world?
John, Democrats say that fossil fuels receive a big amount of subsidies, much more than renewables.
Well, it depends on how you do the counting, Armando. Big time on where you count and how you do the counting. But the issue with wind and solar renewables and its subsidies starts with having to go abroad to get the critical minerals from China. And the subsidy there is the United States shutting down renewable critical mineral mining in the United States and chasing it over to China. Then when it's over in China, we are totally dependent on these minerals for wind and solar and all our military applications. And that is a different kind of subsidy that is set by the United States government. So I think that the Democrats completely miss the accountability of subsidies, aside from the dollars at a wind turbine or whatever. I would like to say just two brief things about, first of all, Ronald's talking about development of products, all the products that have made the modern world, from medicines to billiard balls. I have one graphic on my website, and it shows a light bulb. Okay, it's different than electricity. It's the light bulb itself. And it says that light bulbs were not developed from continuous improvement of the candle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it's the same thing with the modern world with all of the 6,000 byproducts and the specific fuels that make our modern world were not made or developed at all by wind and solar. They were developed through brilliant chemistry and chemical engineering everywhere. And the Democrats, I feel, since we're being asked to talk about by parties, that the Democrats have worked against the chemical industries with the EPA, and they have given many policies substance support to wind and solar that is and will destroy modern civilization. Thank you.
Yeah, so you mean, John, that they do not consider the end-to-end process to calculate the subsidies? Is it correct?
Please.
Now, I mean, when you said that Democrats do not consider subsidies in mining from China, they do not consider the end-to-end process of renewables.
Absolutely, absolutely. They don't see, they don't at least show to their voters uh, what their policies are doing, uh, their physical policies as well as their financial policies, and they don't point out to the voters the tremendous land use and environmental destruction uh, for the development of wind and solar places.
Ronald, talking about environmental regulation, do you see fossil fuels worse or better related to renewables? Are compensated? I mean, they are equivalent, or renewables are not so hard? How do you see?
Well, again, fossil fuels do different things. Let's talk about womb to tomb. The iPhone has a battery. It's microgram. It doesn't take a lot of power to run it. A Tesla battery is 1,000 pounds. There's a lot of lithium, a lot of cobalt, a lot of manganese, a lot of different metals that make up that monster battery. And because those metals aren't in a concentrated location in any place in the world, to make one Tesla battery, you have to move like 500,000 pounds of earth around the world to get the materials to make one Tesla battery. Now, here in California, our illustrious governor, he wants 18-wheelers to go electric. Well, Armando, an 18-wheeler is going to have not a 1,000-pound battery, but a 16,000-pound battery. And to make one 18-wheeler battery, you're going to have to move 8 million pounds of earth just to get the lithium and cobalt, et cetera, to make that one battery. It's not achievable. You can't do this around the world. Besides, to move that much earth, you need monster mining equipment, which is not electric, which is fossil fuel driven. It's made with fossil fuels. And you're going to have to put on ships. There's no electric ships out there. So everything reverts back to fossil fuels, either for the fuel or the derivatives of making all the products. And so when politicians talk energy, you got to stop them. Are you talking electricity, or are you talking about the products that are demanded by society? We got 4 billion people on this earth and we're trying to keep alive and well. And 8 billion people. And if we get rid of fossil fuels, we're going to lose billions from starvation, malnutrition, weather-related fatalities. I mean, it's endless. But you can't get rid of fossil fuels because there's no backup plan. And wind and solar is not a backup plan to support the product supply chain demanded by our materialistic society.
John, how do you see the U.S. dependence on foreign sources like mining and energy? I mean, everything related to energy. Do you see any kind of vulnerability of the U.S.?
I was introduced through my wife in 1970 to the scientist who became President Obama's science advisor, John Holdren. And I started working in the nuclear industry as a civil engineer in 1970, and I worked with them in the nuclear energy fields until 1995. And I worked with John Holdren as a personal friend of the family until about 2004. And in 2004, I asked John Holdren a science question that I had imagined. And I had imagined this question and I had imagined the answer. And I had asked scientists for 20 years what they thought of the question, and they did not answer it because it was too complex. And I asked John Holdren in 2002 about it, and he answered, and he, with all of his brilliance in science, he concurred with my reasoning about it. The point of mentioning that is to talk about John Holdren's influence on America's energy policy from the 1970s to the present. And he has played two key roles. The first key role is starting in the 1970s, he has been arguing that use of fossil fuels is causing climate change. He started out with climate cooling in the 1970s. He switched to global warming, man-made catastrophic global warming in the 1980s. When that wasn't selling enough, he changed the moniker to man-made climate change instead of man-made global warming. And that sold very well, but it didn't sell well enough for Holdren, so he decided to call it man-made climate disruption. And that, again, was too complicated and it didn't sell. So John Holdren has been a key leader in the fight against fossil fuels through the argument of man-made climate change, and that we should be fearful of man-made climate change. And then at the same time, namely starting in 1970 and going all the way through his career in retirement, which I have followed day by day, he has been against the use of advanced nuclear power. And what I mean by advanced nuclear power is that the nuclear power that we have today uses approximately 1% of the nuclear energy that comes out of the nuclear ore. 1%. It's when you go to in the power plants, it's 4%, but that's in the power plant. But he has been totally against, from 1970s, the use of advanced nuclear power, which requires highly enriched uranium. Now, because he says you can make bombs with it, you can't. At least it's so impossible that no enemy in his right mind, if you can say that, would ever do that. They'll get the enriched uranium from many other places. So, and John Holdren has been an advisor behind the scenes from the 70s through the 2010s. And also another scientist at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Have you heard of the Natural Resources Defense Council, Armando?
Yep.
Okay. The Natural Resources Defense Council is the dumbest name of any organization in the world because natural resources don't need defense. It's a manipulation to get Democratic voters feeling good that they are defending natural resources.
Very good.
And the Natural Resources Defense Council chief scientist is Thomas Cochrane. And he is almost a carbon copy of John Holdren. And of course, both are Democrats. And they have been against fossil fuels for energy and nuclear power for energy, which means against the modern world, against our lifestyle, going back to a lifestyle of 300 years or longer before. So,
great. Ronald, do you see many difference between Democrats and Republicans treating nuclear? They see the same way, nuclear energy, nuclear electricity?
Well, I know, Democrats, they're against nuclear. We shut down one of two nuclear plants in California. Diablo Canyon is destined to come down. But since our governor was advised that we're going to run out of electricity, he gave it a life extension. But it's on the chopping blocks. My biggest concern is there's just a lack of conversations among the people that have the microphone. And they've got the microphone, the press transcribes what they say, and it goes in the paper. It says we're jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. That's what goes in the paper. I want to have a discussion. What's the backup plan? And there's no silver bullet answers. And we've grown from 1 billion to 8 billion people in less than 200 years, not because of oil, but because of the products. It makes our life more comfortable. And we can grow food in any country. We can transport it to a different country with the ships and the planes we have. And it's just a different lifestyle. And, to go back to the 1800s, that's going to get rid of a couple billion people. And I don't care what party you're on, that is not the solution.
Yeah. John, Microsoft and Google are recovering old nuclear plants to the electricity demands that they have in terms of artificial intelligence. Is it a good choice for them, you see?
A very good question, Armando, and there are many answers to it. But the main answer that I offer people is as follows. John Holdren and his politicians have worked for 4 decades to stop nuclear power. Stopping nuclear power did 2 things. It caused all the people with experience, knowledge, expertise to die off. They're gone. So we don't have anybody like in large quantities like we had in the 1970s. In France, in South Africa, and in South Korea, etc. And the second thing we don't have is all the Democrats worked intensively behind the scenes with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to impose ridiculous regulations about radiation safety, and worried about tremendous nuclear explosions.
Mhm.
All of those items are still in place. So, from my personal experience, I don't think, I've been saying this for 15 years, prior to Google and Microsoft getting nuclear power for their data centers. I don't think that the world will get back to a full-scale use of nuclear power until these roadblocks have been cleared away. And it's not only the administrative roadblocks, but it's the people who have caused those roadblocks. They have to all go away. And we need people with common sense and practical engineering in place. And then a nuclear energy will blossom. And I would like to just shine a light on my friends in South Africa. I've worked with Dr. Kelvin Kim in South Africa for nuclear power and for understanding climate change, and his colleagues for 15 years. And South Africa is important for one particular reason, and that is we have the 2 poles, China and Russia's nuclear programs, the United States, Europe, and Canada's nuclear programs. Those are 2 poles. But the important thing is that the rest of the world needs energy as much as the United States and Europe, and even more so, because they have a lot more population. And the good scientists in South Africa are ready to move forward. They're very capable, and they're ready to move forward with nuclear power and their own particular designs of nuclear power, which they're waiting on. But the world, it's like the rest of the world doesn't exist for them. China and Russia could be helping them. The United States can be helping them. And I know my friend Kelvin Kem goes both to Russia, China, and the United States as an expert, but he's not getting help from the United States. And China is busy building their own nuclear power plants that they just desperately need. And Russia is already got a very good nuclear program where they're helping a lot of people, and they're maxed out right now. So I'd just like to put in a pitch for South Africa and all the rest of the countries in South Africa's position that the United States really should clean up its act with its energy program for fossil fuels and nuclear power.
Armando, if I can make
Yes.
a concluding
Sure.
comment. The
Sure.
electricity demands are expected to double or triple in the coming years. And this doubling and tripling is not for intermittent electricity. Artificial intelligence data centers need continuous electricity.
Continuous. Yeah, sure.
And I think a great conversation, possibly for next week's podcast, would be a new nuclear posture for the U.S. is vital in a hungry world.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. Good point. Let me show Professor Miguelis from Brazil saying Portuguese. Congratulate you both. As a very, very friend of us. And SRB always follows us. What do you think about micro reactors like the E20 from Westinghouse? Do you think it will be easier to get this approved by the NRC? John and Ronald, how do you
I
see
think
this?
that would be a follow-up discussion next week. It's like I say, the nuclear movement is going on around the world.
Good.
I
Let's
think
concentrate next week in this matter.
US
SRB, please wait the next one. Follow us. Let me go to the last point for you both, John and Ronald, in terms of creating jobs, because the green agenda says that renewables create more jobs than fossil fuels. How do you see this difference?
Well, I see the renewables are causing jobs because it's with subsidies. It's taxpayer dollars. Wind and solar, private industry is not investing in wind and solar. It's got to be subsidies because they don't work most of the time. And so you're not getting private investment. So you're talking about government jobs, i.e. subsidy finance jobs, or private industry jobs. Again, it's apples and oranges.
And it's interesting because John mentioned that in China we have mining and manufacturing of equipment for renewable. So part of jobs are being created outside the US or outside the West countries. John.
Yes, there are a lot of jobs in China for renewable, and bless China for putting wind and solar to good use. It's unstable in most other places, but China is, with all due respect to the fine people in China that I know, China's situation with wind and solar industry is just like their situation with electric vehicles and bicycles. And in both with electric bicycles and electric vehicles, they concentrated on making a lot of them, and they overproduce them. They have mountains of brand new bicycles and mountains of electric cars that haven't been sold, and it's just their skill at overproduction. And they've done the same with wind and solar. And of course, the good thing for China with wind and solar is that it employs people. It creates a lot of people to erect and maintain wind and solar. But the bottom line is putting people to work for fossil fuels, for coal for electricity, crude oil for other fuels and byproducts is a much better result for the human race in the long run than putting them to work erecting and taking down wind turbines and solar panels. So it's much better to put them to work with the fossil fuel industry and nuclear power.
Perfect. Excellent conversation, Ronald Stein and John Shanahan. Was a pleasure. What's your website, John? Could you please spell your website?
Yeah, my website is 3 words with no separators, allabout.energy.net.
Okay. Allabout.energy.net.
Yes.
Perfect. Appreciate Ronald Stein and John Shanahan. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, have a good day, guys.
Have a good day.